Picture yourself standing in a cold, dimly lit prison cell centuries ago, with nothing but the slow march of days to remind you of the world outside. The walls around you are rough, unyielding, but then your fingers trace something unexpected. Not random scratches, but precise, deliberate markings. A calendar carved by someone who refused to let time slip away unnoticed. This isn't just a relic of confinement, it's a testament to human resilience, a silent cry against oblivion. And recently, archaeologists uncovered one such calendar, etched into the stone of an ancient prison wall by exiles forgotten by history. But here's the thing, it's not just a tally of days. It's a puzzle, a coded message from the past, and it's rewriting what we thought we knew about how these prisoners lived, dreamed, and even understood the cosmos. What makes this discovery so extraordinary isn't just its age or its location. It's the sheer humanity behind it. These markings weren't made by kings or scholars. They were carved by ordinary people, exiles, prisoners, souls ripped from their homes and left to wither in isolation. Yet, in that darkness, they clung to something profound, the need to measure time, to mark their existence, to say, "I was here." The calendar's intricate symbols suggest more than just counting days. Some believe they align with celestial events, hinting at a deeper, almost spiritual connection to the skies above. Were they tracking seasons, predicting eclipses, or were these carvings a way to hold onto hope, a ritual to keep their spirits alive? Today, we're going to step inside that cell, to follow the grooves left by hands long turned to dust. We'll explore how this calendar challenges our assumptions about ancient prisons, how it reveals the ingenuity of people pushed to the edge, and why it might hold clues to lost knowledge about astronomy, culture, and even survival. This isn't just a story about stones and carvings, it's about the unbreakable human spirit, the lengths we go to make sense of our place in time, and the echoes of lives that refused to be erased. So come with me and let's unravel the secrets of this ancient calendar, one mark at a time. The discovery of this ancient prison calendar didn't happen by chance. Archaeologists were surveying the ruins of a long-abandoned exile colony, a place shrouded in whispers of rebellion and forgotten lives. As they brushed away centuries of dust and debris, their fingers grazed the grooves in the stone, grooves too precise, too deliberate to be mere wear and tear. And then the full picture emerged, not random scratches but a sprawling, intricate calendar, its markings stretching across the walls like a silent conversation with time itself. What's striking is the level of detail. This wasn't just a prisoner counting days with crude notches. The symbols are methodical, arranged in patterns that mirror lunar cycles and seasonal changes. Some sections even align with known celestial events, suggesting these exiles weren't just surviving. They were observing, calculating, perhaps even predicting. Imagine the dedication it took to carve such a system under the watchful eyes of guards, with limited tools, in a place designed to break spirits. But here's the real mystery: who were the minds behind this? These weren't scholars with parchment and ink. They were outcasts, political dissidents, criminals, maybe even heretics, people stripped of everything but their wits. Yet, in their isolation, they created something extraordinary. Was it a way to maintain a shred of normalcy, a secret code for fellow prisoners, or something deeper, like a ritual to cling to identity when the world tried to erase them? The prison itself adds another layer to the puzzle. Exile sites like these were often dumping grounds for those deemed threats to power. But this calendar hints at a hidden community, a shared knowledge passed between generations of prisoners. Some markings show wear from repeated touching, as if they were part of daily life, a ritual of resistance. And then there are the gaps, missing days, sudden shifts in pattern. Were these errors or intentional omissions? Could they mark moments of despair or even escape attempts? One theory suggests the calendar wasn't just practical, it was spiritual. Certain symbols resemble those found in ancient temples, linked to solstices and harvest rites. If true, it means these prisoners carried their beliefs with them, turning a prison wall into a sacred space. Others argue it was a survival tool, a way to track the best time to forage or avoid harsh weather. But perhaps the most haunting idea is that it was a message, a way to say we existed. We mattered. Every groove tells a story of ingenuity in the face of cruelty, of time measured not just in days but in defiance. And as researchers decode more of these symbols, we're not just learning about a calendar, we're hearing the voices of those who refused to be forgotten. The prison where this calendar was discovered wasn't just a place of punishment, it was a deliberate instrument of control, a tool used by an ancient empire to silence dissent and erase unwanted voices. Nestled in a remote, inhospitable region, far from the bustling cities and fertile lands, these exile sites were designed to break spirits through isolation and hardship. Imagine being torn from your home, marched across unforgiving terrain, and left in a stone cell with no promise of return. This was the reality for countless individuals branded as threats to the empire, political opponents, religious minorities, even scholars whose ideas challenged the status quo. But why send them so far away? Exile wasn't just about removing people from society. It was about severing their ties to everything familiar. The empire understood that isolation could be more crushing than physical torture. Cut off from family, culture, and the rhythms of daily life, prisoners were meant to wither away, their very existence fading into obscurity. Yet, against all odds, they resisted. The calendar on the wall is proof of that. It's as if they were saying, you can banish us, but you can't erase our minds, our memories, our need to make sense of the world. The conditions in these prisons were deliberately harsh. Food was scarce, winters brutal, and contact with the outside world forbidden. Survival depended on ingenuity, finding ways to mark time, to create order in chaos. And that's what makes this calendar so remarkable. It's not just a tally of days, it's a rebellion against the empire's attempt to dehumanize its prisoners. The precision of the carvings suggests collaboration, a shared system passed down among inmates. Some symbols may even correspond to agricultural cycles, hinting that these exiles held onto knowledge from their homelands, preserving it like a secret lifeline. Archaeologists have found similar markings in other exile sites, but none as complex or as meticulously maintained. This particular calendar spans years, possibly decades, with layers of grooves overlapping like whispers across generations. Some sections show signs of repeated use, as if prisoners returned to them daily, grounding themselves in the passage of time. Others bear faint traces of pigment, suggesting they were once highlighted, maybe even used in rituals. Was this their way of holding onto identity, of maintaining a connection to the sacred rhythms of life outside those walls? The empire likely never imagined its prisoners would leave behind such a legacy. They expected these places to be graveyards of the forgotten, but the calendar tells a different story, one of resilience, of minds that refused to be subdued. It challenges our assumptions about what it meant to be powerless. These prisoners had no weapons, no allies, no hope of escape, yet they wielded the one thing their captors couldn't take: their ability to observe, to record, to turn a prison wall into a testament of endurance. Understanding this context transforms the calendar from an artifact into a revelation. It's not just a measuring tool, it's a fingerprint of the human spirit, left behind by people who refuse to let their stories end in silence. And as we decode each symbol, we're not just studying history, we're honoring their defiance. The exiles who carved their days into that prison wall were far from a single, faceless mass. They were thinkers, dreamers, dissenters, people whose very existence threatened the empire's grip on power. Among them, scholars who dared to question official doctrines, their crime nothing more than curiosity. Artisans whose work carried hidden messages of resistance, their hands once skilled with brush and chisel, now turning stone into a language of survival. Nobles who fell from grace, their names struck from records but their minds sharp as ever. Even priests and astronomers, keepers of celestial secrets, whose knowledge may have been too dangerous to leave free. What united them wasn't just their punishment, it was their refusal to vanish. The calendar's precision hints at collaboration, a meeting of minds in that bleak place. Imagine the conversations in hushed tones between a disgraced court mathematician and a farmer exiled for protesting unfair taxes. The astronomer teaching the weaver how to track lunar phases, the priest showing the blacksmith symbols once reserved for temple walls. In any other circumstance, their paths might never have crossed, but here, in the darkness, their skills intertwined, creating something far greater than the sum of their suffering. The empire likely saw them as disposable, but the calendar reveals their true legacy. Those astronomical alignments, they match records from distant observatories, proving some prisoners carried precise knowledge across hundreds of miles. The intricate tally marks, they follow agricultural cycles, suggesting farmers used their expertise to predict planting seasons even in exile, and those mysterious symbols resembling temple inscriptions. They're near identical to ones found in ruined sanctuaries, hinting that religious figures preserved their rituals in secret. Some exiles were undoubtedly political prisoners' voices that spoke too loudly against corruption or injustice. Others may have been casualties of palace intrigue, caught in webs of betrayal. A few might have been ordinary people caught in the wrong place, their lives upended by a single accusation. But the calendar doesn't distinguish between them. In those grooves, the scholar and the shepherd stood equal, their shared humanity etched into stone. What's most striking is the absence of despair in these markings. Each line is deliberate, purposeful. These weren't people merely counting down to death. They were mapping time as if they still had a future. That's the real rebellion here, not just against an empire, but against oblivion itself. They refused to let their stories end in silence, and now, centuries later, we're finally listening. The markings on this prison wall calendar are far more than simple scratches. They're a sophisticated language of timekeeping, etched with purpose. Look closely, and you'll notice clusters of symbols repeating in precise intervals, some arranged in arcs that mirror the moon's phases. Others form straight lines intersecting at angles that align with the sun's path during solstices. This isn't the work of amateurs. It's the product of minds deeply attuned to the rhythms of the cosmos. Take the lunar sequences first. Certain grooves appear in groups of 29 or 30, matching the days between new moons. But here's what's fascinating. They're not just counting. Adjacent symbols resemble ancient notations for planting and harvest, suggesting these exiles weren't merely tracking time but using it to survive. Imagine being torn from fertile homelands and dumped in a barren outpost. That knowledge of when to sow or reap would be a lifeline, a way to coax food from unforgiving soil. Then there are the solar alignments. One section of the wall bears a series of deeper carvings positioned at specific heights. During excavations, researchers noticed sunlight enters the cell at certain times of year, striking these exact marks. The summer solstice beam hits the highest groove, winter the lowest. It's as if the prisoners turned their prison into a makeshift observatory, using the architecture itself to mark the turning of the seasons. But why go to such lengths? For agricultural exiles, tracking seasons meant the difference between starvation and survival. For priestly prisoners, it may have been about preserving sacred calendars, keeping rituals alive even in captivity. And for political dissidents, marking solstices could have been an act of defiance, a way to assert that the empire's laws couldn't override natural law. The most enigmatic symbols, though, are the ones that don't match any known celestial pattern. Tiny clusters of dots, spirals that resemble whirlpools, even what look like animal shapes. Some scholars think these could be personal notations, birthdays of lost loved ones, anniversaries of uprisings, or coded messages to fellow prisoners. Others suggest they're fragments of a larger system, one that wove together astronomy, myth, and memory into a single, enduring testament. What's clear is that this calendar was never just a tool. It was a tapestry of meaning, each groove a thread connecting these exiles to the world beyond their walls. And as we piece together its design, we're not just decoding marks on stone, we're recovering a lost dialogue between humanity and the heavens. The astronomical precision of this prison calendar isn't just impressive, it's revolutionary. When researchers first noticed certain markings aligning with solar and lunar events, they assumed it was coincidence. But the deeper they looked, the clearer it became. These exiles weren't just counting days, they were mapping the heavens from the confines of their cells. One cluster of symbols, for example, corresponds precisely to a series of lunar eclipses known to have occurred during their imprisonment. Another set of grooves mirrors the positions of Venus as it cycled through its phases, a feat requiring nightly observations over months, if not years. How did prisoners with no instruments, no scrolls, no freedom to step outside achieve such accuracy? The answer might lie in the diversity of the exiles themselves. Among them were likely astronomers or temple scribes, individuals trained to track celestial movements long before their imprisonment. Stripped of tools, they may have improvised using cracks in the walls as sightlines, or water bowls as reflective surfaces to catch glimpses of the night sky through narrow windows. Some markings even suggest they corrected for seasonal shifts, adjusting their calendar to account for the wobble of Earth's axis. This wasn't just record keeping, it was active, real-time science conducted under the harshest conditions. But the most startling revelation comes from a series of intersecting lines near the cell's ceiling. When archaeologists modeled the sunlight patterns in the original structure, they discovered these grooves marked the summer and winter solstices with near-perfect accuracy. On the shortest day of the year, a sliver of light would pierce the cell's opening and align perfectly with the lowest carving. On the longest day, it touched the highest. This wasn't just observational, it was architectural astronomy, turning the prison itself into a timekeeping device. Why go to such lengths? For agricultural exiles, tracking solstices could mean predicting when to scavenge for early sprouts or store food for winter. For priestly prisoners, it may have been about preserving sacred rituals tied to celestial events. But there's another, more poignant possibility. These markings were a tether to the world beyond. In a place designed to erase identity, tracking the stars, something their captors couldn't control may have been the ultimate act of defiance. The empire could lock away their bodies, but not their connection to the cosmos. The implications ripple far beyond this single cell. If isolated prisoners could maintain such precise records, how much more sophisticated might the astronomical knowledge of their free counterparts have been? This calendar hints at a broader, oral tradition of science, one passed down not in libraries, but in whispers between generations of the dispossessed. It challenges the myth that ancient astronomy was solely the domain of elites with polished brass instruments. Here, in the darkness, we find proof that the drive to understand the universe is as human as resilience itself. The prison calendar etched into that cold stone wall shares a language of time with the great ancient systems, the Mayan long count, the Egyptian solar calendar, the Babylonian star charts, but its story couldn't be more different. Where those systems were carved into temple walls by royal decree, maintained by scholars with ink and parchment, this one was born in shadows, its creators working with nothing but stolen moments and makeshift tools. Yet in their isolation, these prisoners achieved something remarkable, a calendar that blends the precision of state-sponsored systems with the raw ingenuity of survival. Take the Mayan calendar, for instance. Its famous cyclical design tracked celestial events with astonishing accuracy, but it served a centralized purpose, scheduling rituals, agricultural cycles, and imperial events. The prison calendar, though, wasn't about sustaining an empire, it was about sustaining the human spirit. Both tracked lunar phases, but where Mayan priests used observatories, these exiles used cracks in their cell walls to glimpse the night sky. The Egyptian calendar, rigidly tied to the Nile's floods, reflected a society's dependence on nature's rhythms. The prisoner's version, though, adapted those rhythms to a world where nature itself was a distant memory. Their markings don't just follow the stars, they wrest meaning from them, turning celestial patterns into a lifeline. What sets this calendar apart isn't just its origin, it's its purpose. The Babylonians recorded eclipses to predict omens for kings. These prisoners may have done it to predict the next time light would touch their faces. The Incas used quipu knots to track seasons for harvests. Here, the grooves might have marked when edible plants would sprout near the prison walls. Even the Roman Julian calendar, designed to standardize time across an empire, feels impersonal compared to the intimacy of these carvings. You can almost trace the fingers that return to certain symbols day after day, as if touching them could summon memories of home. Yet the most striking difference is in what's missing. State calendars glorified rulers, pharaohs' reigns, imperial victories. This one bears no names, no conquests. Its power lies in its silence. The Mayans left behind monuments, the Egyptians papyri. These prisoners left whispers in stone, a testament not to power but to persistence, and that's what makes it so vital. In comparing it to the grand systems of antiquity, we don't just see contrasts, we see what happens when knowledge isn't curated by the privileged, but clawed back from oblivion by those with nothing left to lose. The prison calendar forces us to rethink who gets to measure time and why. It's a reminder that even in the darkest corners of history, people found ways to say, "I am here, and the sky still turns for me." And in that defiance, they created something as enduring as any pyramid or obelisk, not etched in gold, but in the unyielding stone of human resilience. Imagine spending years in a cell where every day blurs into the next, where the only certainty is the endless stretch of stone walls. For the exiles who carved this calendar, timekeeping wasn't just about counting days. It was about reclaiming a shred of sanity in a world designed to strip it away. Each groove they etched was a defiance of the empire's greatest weapon, the erasure of identity through endless, unmarked time. Psychologists who have studied modern prisoners describe how marking days becomes a ritual of survival, a way to anchor the mind when the outside world fades. But these ancient exiles took it further. Their calendar wasn't just a tally, it was a map of meaning, a way to transform their captivity from a void into a narrative they could control. Consider the power of those small, daily acts, watching for the sun's angle to shift, feeling the moon's cycle through the chill of the cell, carving a symbol with trembling hands. These weren't passive observations, they were assertions of agency. In modern terms, we might call it temporal agency, the ability to structure one's own experience of time, even when every other freedom is gone. For political prisoners, marking a solstice could have been a silent protest, a way to say, your laws change, but the heavens do not. For parents torn from children, tracking lunar months might have been a promise. I remember how long we've been apart. The calendar's very design reveals its dual purpose: practical, yes, predicting when wild herbs might sprout near the prison walls or when winter winds would bite hardest. But also profoundly symbolic. Some sections show where patterns suggesting repeated touching, as if running fingers over the grooves was a meditative act. Others bear faint traces of ochre or charcoal, hinting at moments when these marks became more than utility, perhaps anniversaries, birthdays, or festivals observed in secret. What's haunting is how these practices echo across history. From POWs scratching walls in World War II to dissidents in Cold War prisons keeping diaries in code, timekeeping under duress follows a universal pattern. It's as if the human mind, when pushed to the edge, instinctively reaches for chronology as a lifeline. But this ancient calendar adds a layer we rarely see: celestial precision as an act of defiance. By tracking the stars, these exiles weren't just surviving, they were proving their captors couldn't sever their connection to the cosmos itself. The Empire sought to break them with indeterminacy, to let the weight of endless, unmarked time crush their spirits. Instead, the prisoners turned time into a companion. Their calendar whispers across centuries that even in darkness, to measure is to resist. And in that resistance, they left us more than marks on stone. They left a blueprint for the unbreakable mind. The symbols etched into that prison wall calendar don't just mark time, they whisper secrets. Look closely, and you'll notice shapes that echo ancient religious motifs. A crescent moon cradling a cluster of dots like a deity holding stars, or zigzag lines mirroring the lightning bolts of a storm god. These aren't random scratches, they're deliberate echoes of a world beyond those walls, a world the exiles were forced to leave behind. One series of symbols, for instance, matches votive offerings found in distant temples, small, precise carvings of hands cupping grain. Were these prisoners recreating rituals they could no longer perform, turning a prison wall into an altar? Then there are the animal figures hidden among the tally marks. A stag with antlers branching like a tree, its form stylized but unmistakable. In the exile's homeland, such imagery often symbolized renewal or the cycle of seasons. Its presence here suggests more than nostalgia. It's a defiant act of cultural preservation. Imagine carving this under the watch of gods, knowing discovery could mean punishment, yet doing it anyway because some truths are too vital to surrender. The most haunting symbols, though, are the ones that defy easy interpretation. Spirals that coil inward like labyrinths, or rows of dots that cluster in patterns resembling constellations not visible from that latitude. Some scholars believe these could be maps, not of places but of journeys. The spiral might represent the underworld, a path souls were believed to travel in certain traditions. The unfamiliar stars, perhaps a celestial guide to lead the dead home. If so, this calendar wasn't just for the living. It was a bridge between worlds, a way for the exile to honor those they'd lost and prepare for their own passage. What makes these symbols so powerful is their duality. The same groove that tracked the moon's phase might also invoke a lunar goddess. A solar alignment could serve both as a farming guide and a silent prayer for warmth. This blending of practicality and spirituality reveals something profound. For these prisoners, time wasn't just a measurement. It was a tapestry woven with meaning, where every scratch held layers of survival, memory, and hope. Modern eyes might see a primitive calendar, but look deeper, and it becomes a manifesto proof that even in chains, the human spirit refuses to be reduced to mere existence. These carvings scream across centuries that they were more than prisoners. They were keepers of stories, guardians of traditions, and in the end, architects of their own immortality. The precision of those calendar markings tells a silent story of ingenuity because creating them shouldn't have been possible. Prisoners in that ancient exile colony had no access to chisels, no fine tools for etching stone. Guards would have confiscated anything resembling a weapon or an instrument of rebellion. Yet the grooves in the wall are crisp, deliberate, some so fine they could only have been made with something sharper than a fingernail or a scrap of wood. So how did they do it? The answer lies in the scraps the empire overlooked. Broken pottery became their most valuable resource. A shard with a jagged edge, carefully honed against rough stone, could carve softer limestone over time. Archaeologists have found traces of ceramic residue in the deeper grooves, suggesting prisoners traded fragments or even hid them in cracks between stones. But pottery wasn't the only tool. Animal bones discarded from meager meals could be sharpened into style, their points sturdy enough to scratch symbols without snapping. And then there's the most surprising discovery: flakes of flint embedded in the wall's mortar, likely smuggled in by laborers forced to repair the prison. These weren't just rocks, they were blades in disguise, capable of precision work when handled with patience. The real brilliance, though, was in their collaboration. One prisoner might barter a bone fragment for an extra ration of bread. Another could distract guards while a third pocketed a useful stone. The calendar's uniformity suggests knowledge was shared. Someone skilled in carving taught others, turning individual acts of defiance into a collective project. And the tools evolved over time. Early markings are rougher, shallower, as if made with makeshift scrapers. Later symbols grow more refined, hinting at better tools or improved techniques passed between generations of prisoners. What's most striking isn't just what they used, but what they didn't. No metal marks have been found, proving they worked without iron or bronze, materials too valuable or dangerous for captives to possess. Instead, they transformed trash into treasure, turning the empire's indifference into an advantage. Every groove is a testament to their resourcefulness, a reminder that even in scarcity, the human mind finds a way to leave its mark. The walls themselves became part of the process. Researchers noticed certain symbols were carved along natural fissures in the stone, exploiting weaknesses to make the work easier. Others were positioned where moisture seeped in, the dampness softening the surface just enough to allow deeper etching. These prisoners didn't just adapt to their environment, they weaponized it, turning the very architecture of their oppression into a canvas for resilience. And then there are the unseen tools, time and desperation. With nothing but endless days to fill, etching the calendar became a ritual, a way to wield control over the one thing their captors couldn't fully take, their minds. The precision of those markings isn't just a technical feat, it's the handwriting of people who refused to let their thoughts decay. In the end, the greatest tool wasn't a shard of pottery or a bone fragment. It was the unyielding will to say, "I am here," in strokes too fine for the empire to erase. Theories about who created this intricate prison calendar reveal as much about human nature as they do about history itself. Some scholars argue the markings bear the unmistakable consistency of a single mind, perhaps an astronomer or priest who meticulously recorded celestial events over years of confinement. The uniformity in symbol depth and spacing suggests one steady hand, someone who treated the wall as their personal ledger of time. But here's the twist: other sections show abrupt shifts in style, variations in carving techniques that hint at multiple contributors. A cluster of lunar phases might be rendered with elegant curves, while nearby solar alignments appear angular, almost rushed, as if different people left their distinct signatures in stone. Another compelling theory suggests this was a generational project, passed down like a sacred torch from one group of exiles to the next. Imagine an elder teaching a newcomer how to extend the solstice markers, their whispered instructions weaving knowledge into survival. Certain symbols appear fresher, overlapping older grooves in ways that imply additions across decades. It's a haunting thought that this calendar could have outlived its creators, becoming a living document for those who came after. Yet the most fascinating possibility is that it was both collective and deeply personal. A core group, say, a disgraced scholar, a farmer attuned to seasons, and a temple scribe might have established the system, while others added private notations over time. Some markings resemble personal tallies, like a prisoner counting meals or plotting escape windows. Others seem communal, like eclipse predictions that required shared observation. The truth likely lies in this duality, a framework born of collaboration, adapted by individuals clinging to fragments of identity. What's undeniable is the calendar's role as a social artifact. In a place designed to isolate, these carvings became a silent conversation, a groove deepened by many hands, a symbol corrected by an unseen peer, each act a thread in an invisible network of mutual aid. Even if one person began it, the wall's legacy belongs to the community that sustained it. The empire sought to fracture bonds, but in tracing the stars together, these exiles forged connections no prison could erase. Among the grooves and symbols of the prison calendar, certain patterns stand out not just as measurements of time, but as echoes of secret ceremonies. One cluster of markings near the cell's corner forms a shape eerily reminiscent of ancient altar designs, its lines converging like rays around a central point. Another section shows repetitive, rhythmic strokes, their spacing too deliberate to be mere record-keeping, more like the cadence of a chant or prayer. These aren't just scratches, they're potential evidence of rituals conducted in shadow, a hidden spiritual life flourishing behind bars. Consider the context. These exiles came from societies where timekeeping and worship were deeply entwined. Solstices weren't just seasonal markers, they were sacred moments celebrated with fire and song. The empire that imprisoned them sought to sever those connections, banning communal rites as dangerously subversive. Yet here, in the sterile silence of a cell, the calendar may have become a covert temple. The alignment of certain symbols with celestial events takes on new meaning, not just as practical astronomy, but as a way to observe forbidden festivals. A groove marking the summer solstice could have doubled as an invitation to whisper hymns to a forgotten sun god. A lunar phase might have signaled when to leave scraps of food as offerings, their meager rations transformed into sacred acts. The evidence is subtle but compelling. Some symbols match those found in underground shrines from the same era, where persecuted groups worshipped in secret. Others resemble hand gestures depicted in religious art, fingers outstretched in blessing or supplication. Even the wear patterns tell a story. Certain areas show smoother, polished stone, as if touched repeatedly in the same spot, perhaps during daily devotions. And then there's the charcoal. Traces of pigment in deeper grooves suggest symbols were periodically darkened, maybe during moonless nights or anniversaries of exile, turning the wall into a living, changing canvas of faith. But why risk it? Because rituals aren't just about belief, they're about identity. In a place designed to strip prisoners of both, maintaining even fragments of tradition became an act of defiance. A farmer might have carved symbols for rain dances, clinging to the rhythms of a homeland they'd never see again. A priest could have recreated temple rites in miniature, consecrating the wall with whispered invocations. Even if no one else saw these acts, they mattered. They turned time into something holy, each day not just endured but consecrated. This duality calendar as tool and as sacred text challenges how we view survival in extremis. The empire expected these prisoners to break, to forget who they'd been. Instead, they smuggled their world into the cracks of stone, measuring days not just by the sun's arc, but by the persistence of memory. The wall became more than a record. It was a sanctuary, a place where time itself could be made sacred again. The survival of knowledge in that desolate prison cell is nothing short of miraculous. Cut off from libraries, star charts, or even the basic tools of scholarship, these exiles somehow preserved an understanding of astronomy precise enough to track celestial events for years. How? The answer lies in the untold power of human memory and the clandestine ways knowledge endures when survival depends on it. Imagine an exiled astronomer, stripped of scrolls and instruments, reciting lunar cycles like poetry in the dark. Or a temple scribe etching sacred geometry from memory, each line an act of defiance against forgetting. Oral tradition likely played a crucial role. In many ancient cultures, complex astronomical data was passed down through chants, rhymes, or rhythmic storytelling mnemonic devices designed to survive generations without writing. A prisoner might have whispered celestial patterns to a cellmate, turning numbers into songs that guards couldn't confiscate. Researchers have found similar techniques among indigenous cultures, where star lore was encoded in oral epics. The grooves on the wall may be the physical manifestation of those whispered lessons, a translation of memory into stone, but memory alone doesn't explain the precision. Hidden texts could have been smuggled in scraps of parchment sewn into clothing, or tiny inscribed tablets passed hand to hand. Some symbols on the wall resemble shorthand notations used by ancient astronomers, suggesting coded references to lost documents. Even more intriguing is the possibility of shadow libraries, knowledge preserved on unconventional materials. There are accounts of prisoners writing on leather strips, bark, or even their own skin. A single smuggled diagram could have been copied and recopied, its essence distilled into those wall carvings. The true marvel, though, is how they adapted. Without quadrants or astrolabes, they improvised. A crack in the ceiling became a zenith marker. The angle of sunlight through a barred window transformed into a seasonal gauge. This wasn't rote repetition, it was active science, problem solving under constraints that would crush most minds. Their ability to adjust calculations based on limited observation hints at deep conceptual understanding, not just memorized data. They didn't just preserve knowledge, they reinvented its application. What's often overlooked is the social scaffolding behind this feat. Knowledge this precise couldn't have survived through solitary effort. It required networks, elders teaching newcomers, experts cross-checking each other's work, mistakes being corrected over time. The calendar's consistency suggests a system, however informal, for verifying and refining information. In a place designed to atomize people, they built invisible schools. This raises a haunting parallel. How much other ancient knowledge persisted through similar acts of quiet resistance? The prison calendar forces us to reconsider where history's true archives might lie, not just in grand libraries, but in the stubborn memories of the displaced, the persecuted, the erased. Their legacy reminds us that human understanding is as resilient as it is fragile, and that sometimes the most vital truths are those carved in the darkest corners. Unearthing the prison calendar was like trying to reconstruct a symphony from a single, weathered instrument. The site itself fought against discovery, perched on a windswept cliff, its walls crumbling into the sea with each passing storm. Excavation teams battled not just the elements, but time itself, as sections of the calendar risked vanishing before they could be documented. Scaffolding had to be erected against unstable walls, while laser scanners captured every groove before salt air could erase them further. Even the act of brushing away dust became a high-stakes operation. One wrong move could dislodge centuries of fragile history, but the physical challenges were just the beginning. Deciphering these markings demanded something rarer than precision tools, a meeting of minds across disciplines. Archaeologists mapped each symbol's position, but it took historians to recognize their cultural echoes, how certain curves mirrored temple carvings from distant regions. Astronomers then stepped in, cross-referencing the grooves with celestial records, revealing that what looked like random scratches were actually meticulous eclipse predictions. One particularly contentious debate centered around a series of dots that some argued represented a lost comet sighting, while others insisted they were tallies of prisoner rations. Without this collaborative web of expertise, the calendar would have remained just scratches on a wall. The interdisciplinary friction itself became a revelation. Astronomers initially dismissed some symbols as too imprecise until historians pointed out they matched folk methods of timekeeping used by farmers, not scholars. Conversely, archaeologists assumed certain markings were decorative until astronomers demonstrated their alignment with planetary movements. This back and forth exposed a blind spot in how we study ancient artifacts. We often expect precision to look modern, when in reality, innovation wears many faces. The prisoner's astronomy wasn't less sophisticated because it used cracks in walls as instruments. It was ingenious because it made the impossible possible with nothing but observation and memory. Preservation posed its own ethical dilemmas. Some researchers advocated for removing sections of the wall to protect them in museums, while others fought to leave every stone in situ, arguing that context was inseparable from meaning. In the end, they developed a hybrid approach, 3D printing replicas for study while stabilizing the originals with nanoscale consolidants. But perhaps the greatest lesson emerged from the calendar's imperfections. Unlike polished temple inscriptions, these carvings bore corrections: a groove abandoned here, a symbol recarved there. These mistakes became precious evidence of real-time learning, showing how knowledge evolved not in ivory towers, but in the grit and urgency of survival. What began as an excavation became a testament to how fragile and resilient history truly is. The calendar survived because it was carved in stone, yet it nearly vanished because that stone was forgotten. Its resurrection required not just digging, but listening, to archaeologists' trowels, historians' texts, and astronomers' equations alike. And in that chorus, we hear something profound, that the most enduring mysteries aren't solved by lone geniuses, but by the collective willingness to stand at the intersections of disciplines and say, "Tell me what you see." The discovery of this prison calendar didn't just add another artifact to museum shelves. It shattered long-held assumptions about how ancient societies treated their outcasts. For centuries, historians pictured exile colonies as places where prisoners languished in passive despair, their identities erased by the weight of punishment. But these carvings tell a different story. They reveal individuals who refused to be reduced to mere victims, who transformed their confinement into a canvas for intellect, community, and even beauty. Suddenly, the narrative of ancient justice isn't just about cruelty. It's about the quiet rebellion of the human spirit against systems designed to break it. This shift in perspective is rippling through academia. Scholars are revisiting ancient penal records with fresh eyes, questioning whether other exiled populations left behind similar traces of resilience. A handful of previously overlooked sites, remote fortresses, abandoned mining camps, are being re-examined for faint etchings or markings that might have been dismissed as graffiti. Already, tantalizing parallels are emerging. In the ruins of a Roman-era silver mine, archaeologists recently uncovered a series of notches on a support beam that appear to track seasonal changes in daylight. In the high deserts of Central Asia, a crumbling watchtower once used to house political prisoners bears symbols resembling celestial maps. The prison calendar has become a Rosetta Stone for decoding these silent testimonies, proving that even in the darkest corners of history, people found ways to assert their humanity. Beyond academia, the find has sparked broader conversations about how we remember the marginalized. Museums traditionally showcase the treasures of kings and conquerors, but this calendar insists that the stories of the displaced matter just as much. Curators are now wrestling with how to display it not as a curiosity, but as a testament to ingenuity under oppression. Some advocate for immersive reconstructions, placing visitors in a replica cell to feel the weight of isolation while tracing the carvings. Others argue for pairing it with modern prison art, drawing lines between ancient exiles and today's incarcerated creators. The calendar forces us to ask, whose voices have we overlooked because they weren't etched in marble, but in stone meant to bury them? The cultural impact extends into unexpected realms. Contemporary artists are drawing inspiration from the calendar's blend of precision and poetry, creating works that merge astronomy with themes of resistance. One installation projects the carvings onto skyscrapers, turning a prisoner's timekeeping into a city-scale monument. Writers, too, are imagining the lives behind the Marx novels, and plays now weave narratives around the astronomer who mapped stars from his cell, or the mother who tracked moons as a promise to her children. Even educators are using the calendar to teach not just history, but the universality of creativity under constraint. Students analyze its symbols alongside messages smuggled by modern political prisoners, discovering how the need to leave a mark transcends eras. What began as an archaeological curiosity has become a mirror. The calendar challenges us to rethink who gets remembered and how. It asks us to consider the ingenuity flourishing in today's shadows, the refugee camps, the prisons, the margins where society discards its unwanted. If these ancient exiles could turn a wall into a legacy, what might others be creating right now, unseen? The greatest lesson of the calendar isn't about the past. It's about where we choose to look and who we decide is worth listening to, even when they speak in grooves on stone. Modern technology has become the key to unlocking the hidden language of this ancient prison calendar, peeling back layers of time to reveal what centuries of weathering tried to erase. When researchers first examined the wall, many symbols were so faint they seemed like mere discolorations in the stone. But with multispectral imaging, suddenly, grooves invisible to the naked eye emerged in startling clarity. This technique, originally developed for satellite mapping, captures light wavelengths beyond human vision, exposing subtle variations in the rock's surface. What looked like blank patches transformed into intricate lunar charts, their precision preserved under a thin veil of mineral deposits. But the breakthroughs didn't stop there. Three-dimensional laser scanning allowed archaeologists to create a digital twin of the entire wall, millimeter by millimeter. By manipulating light angles in virtual space, they discovered previously unnoticed patterns, shallow arcs, connecting symbols that suggested a unified system for predicting solstices. Even more astonishing, some carvings showed tool marks so precise they revealed the prisoner's technique, a back-and-forth motion with a bone or flint edge, often adjusted mid-groove to correct for errors. These weren't just random scratches, they were conscious calculations now observable in microscopic detail. Chemical analysis added another layer to the story. Portable X-ray fluorescence devices, small enough to hold in one hand, detected traces of iron oxide and charcoal in the deepest grooves, evidence that prisoners periodically darkened the symbols, possibly during rituals or important celestial events. The uneven distribution of pigments hinted at a hierarchy of knowledge. Certain markings were emphasized repeatedly, while others faded unnoticed. Even the stone itself became a clue. Spectrographic scans identified minerals in the limestone that reacted differently to touch over time, allowing researchers to determine which symbols were interacted with, most likely the ones holding communal significance. The most poignant revelation came from reflectance transformation imaging, a technique that simulates sunlight at different times of day. When applied to the cell's architecture, it proved the prisoners didn't just track celestial events, they engineered their environment to amplify them. Certain symbols aligned perfectly with beams of light entering through a narrow window during equinoxes, turning the entire wall into a sundial. This level of sophistication, uncovered through modern tools, rewrites what we thought possible in such oppressive conditions. Yet for all its power, technology hasn't replaced human intuition, it's amplified it. Artificial intelligence algorithms sifted through thousands of symbol combinations, flagging potential matches to known ancient calendars. But it took historians to recognize how those patterns echoed folk traditions from the prisoners' homelands. Supercomputers modeled celestial movements across centuries, yet astronomers still debated which events held personal meaning versus practical use. The real magic happens at this intersection, machines revealing the physical evidence and human minds interpreting its emotional weight. Now, these tools are being shared globally. Three-dimensional models of the calendar are available online, inviting crowdsourced analysis from amateur archaeologists and descendant communities. A high school physics class in Norway recently used the data to corroborate an eclipse prediction hidden in the markings, while a textile artist in New Mexico wove the symbols into a tapestry honoring exile resilience. This democratization of discovery ensures the calendar isn't just studied, it's lived with, a bridge between ancient ingenuity and modern curiosity. What began as a silent wall now speaks through pixels and algorithms, its voice growing clearer with every technological advance. And as we listen, we're reminded that the prisoners' greatest act of defiance wasn't just carving their marks, it was creating something so enduring it would wait centuries for the right tools to be fully understood. Not everyone interprets these ancient prison carvings the same way. Among historians and archaeologists, heated debates simmer over what the calendar truly represents, and the disagreements reveal just how much is still at stake in understanding these marks. One camp insists the symbols served an entirely practical function, arguing that survival in such harsh conditions demanded precise timekeeping. To them, the lunar cycles and solstice alignments were tools for predicting weather patterns, signaling when to forage for scarce food, or marking the passage of seasons to endure another year. They point to grooves that correspond with known agricultural cycles, evidence that these exiles clung to practical knowledge as a lifeline. But others push back, seeing something far more profound in the etchings. The presence of symbols resembling religious motifs, the wear patterns suggesting repeated touching, these aren't just survival tactics, they argue, but acts of quiet rebellion. A farmer tracking the moon might also be honoring a harvest deity banned by the empire. A solstice mark could double as a covert celebration of a forbidden festival. This camp views the calendar as a subversive masterpiece, a way to smuggle identity and meaning into a place designed to erase both. The debate isn't just academic, it's about whether we see these prisoners as mere survivors or as cultural warriors. Then there's the question of accuracy. Some researchers, armed with astronomical software, have mapped the carvings against historical celestial events and found startling precision, eclipse predictions correct to within days, planetary alignments too exact to be coincidence. But skeptics counter that many symbols are irregular or ambiguous, more likely rough approximations than scientific records. The truth might lie somewhere in between. Without instruments, these prisoners relied on memory and improvised observation, blending inherited knowledge with real-time adjustments. What looks like an error to modern eyes could be evidence of adaptation, a prisoner correcting a lunar cycle based on what they actually saw through a barred window, not what some old scroll dictated. The controversies don't stop there. A vocal minority even challenges the calendar's origins, suggesting some symbols were added later by guards or visitors, muddying the prisoner's original intent. Others propose that certain markings aren't timekeeping at all, but coded messages escape routes, warnings, or tributes to lost loved ones. These debates aren't just splitting hairs, they're reshaping how we understand resistance in antiquity. If a carving could be both a farming aid and a secret hymn, then the line between survival and defiance blurs entirely. What's remarkable is how these disputes fuel new research. Every fresh argument sends archaeologists back to the wall with better tools, linguists scouring obscure dialects for symbol parallels, and astronomers rechecking ancient sky charts. The calendar's mysteries refuse to settle into easy answers, and that's exactly what makes it so alive. These grooves on stone aren't just relics, they're a conversation across centuries, one we're still learning how to join. Among the calendar's most enigmatic symbols are those that defy classification, markings that don't match any known script or tradition from the dominant civilizations of that era. A series of interconnected loops near the cell's ceiling, for example, bears an uncanny resemblance to petroglyphs found in a remote mountain range thousands of miles away, a region once home to a nomadic culture wiped out by plague. Elsewhere, zigzag patterns echo motifs from a coastal society whose settlements vanished beneath rising seas centuries before the prison was built. These outliers aren't just artistic flourishes. They could be fragments of lost knowledge, carried into exile by prisoners torn from the last pockets of vanishing worlds. The implications are staggering. If these markings preserve elements of extinct or marginalized cultures, the calendar becomes more than a timekeeping tool. It's a mosaic of endangered wisdom. Consider the dotted spirals clustered in one corner, almost identical to symbols found on pottery shards from a little-known island civilization. Historians once assumed that culture had no writing system, yet here, in a prison cell, their notation might have survived. A disgraced sailor, perhaps, or a kidnapped artisan could have etched these shapes as a lifeline to a homeland already fading from memory. The empire sought to homogenize its dominions, but the wall whispers of diversity it couldn't erase. Even more tantalizing are the symbols that resist all identification. One recurring motif, a stork-like figure crowned with radiating lines, appears nowhere else in the archaeological record. Was this the emblem of a tribe so thoroughly eradicated that no other traces remain? Or could it represent something more abstract, like a celestial phenomenon observed only in a specific valley or a ritual object from a secretive sect? The prison's role as a dumping ground for the empire's undesirables means its walls could hold echoes of dozens of cultures deemed threatening enough to exile, but not worth documenting. This diversity challenges the traditional narrative of history as written by victors. While official records glorified the empire's triumphs, the calendar preserves the voices of those it tried to silence. A single cell might contain astronomical knowledge from a desert-dwelling clan, agricultural lore from highland farmers, and sacred geometry from a coastal priesthood, all blending into a shared language of survival. The very act of combining these systems suggests cooperation between prisoners, a cross-pollination of ideas that would have been unthinkable in the rigid hierarchies outside those walls. Modern technology offers new hope for decoding these mysteries. By scanning the symbols into databases and comparing them with obscure artifacts in museum archives, researchers have begun spotting faint connections. One previously dismissed marking matched a trader's seal from a caravan city swallowed by dunes. Another aligned with tattoos seen on mummified remains from a bog burial site. Each hit is a thread pulling us deeper into the shadows of history, toward people who left no grand monuments, only these stubborn, silent marks. The calendar's greatest lesson might be about fragility and endurance. Empires built towering cities that crumbled, while the condemned, armed with nothing but scraps and memory, preserved what palaces could not. In their grooves, we find not just time measured, but cultures refusing to die. Every unidentifiable symbol is an open question, a challenge to keep looking for the stories still buried, waiting for their turn to speak. The deepest grooves on that prison wall might not just mark the passage of days, they could be a deliberate shout into the future, a message carved in the only language that wouldn't fade. Some researchers argue the calendar's precision goes beyond survival. Its patterns are too deliberate, its symbols too layered to serve only those who etched them. What if these exiles knew their stories would be erased by history, and this was their last desperate attempt to say, "We were here"? The theory transforms every scratch from a practical notation into a potential time capsule, a conversation with people they'd never meet. Look at the evidence. Certain symbols cluster in ways that defy pure timekeeping, repeating sequences that resemble memorial formulas found on ancient tombstones. One section shows a series of crescents interspersed with human figures, their arms raised as if in ceremony. Another bears a sequence of numbers matching the ages of known political prisoners executed during that era. Were these carvings a memorial, a way to ensure the empire's victims weren't forgotten? The wall's most worn areas, those touched most often, align with symbols for return and remember in nearby dialects, hinting at a ritual of hope that their names might one day be spoken again. Then there's the calendar's placement. Unlike tallies hidden in corners, these markings sprawl across the most visible wall, as if meant to be seen. The exiles knew their captors wouldn't care about lunar cycles, but someone, someday, might. Archaeologists have even found traces of pigment in the deepest grooves, suggesting symbols were periodically darkened, not for utility but for visibility. This wasn't just record keeping, it was maintenance, a way to keep the message legible across generations. The most haunting possibility is that the calendar encodes multiple layers of meaning. Solar alignments could guide future excavators to dig in certain directions, perhaps toward hidden graves or supply caches. Lunar notations might mark dates of uprisings or mass escapes, preserved as warnings or inspiration. One controversial study suggests some symbols form a rudimentary map, with dotted lines tracing the path to a nearby mountain pass, an escape route, or a sacred site. If true, the calendar becomes both guide and testament, a way to say, we suffered here but we also dreamed. Modern parallels give this theory weight. From Holocaust victims etching diaries into concentration camp walls to political prisoners today smuggling out coded letters, the oppressed have always found ways to outlast their oppressors. The exile's calendar fits this lineage, not just a tool for survival, but a weapon against oblivion. Every groove is a defiance of the empire's greatest cruelty, the assumption that no one would remember. Yet the message's full meaning remains just out of reach. Without knowing the prisoners' names or voices, we're left to interpret their marks like constellations, connecting dots into shapes that may or may not mirror their intent. Perhaps that's the point. The calendar's power lies in its openness, its ability to speak across centuries without being tied to a single interpretation. It doesn't just say, "This happened." It asks, "Will you listen?" Preserving this ancient prison calendar isn't just about safeguarding an artifact. It's about protecting a fragile conversation across centuries. The stone that once shielded these carvings from prying eyes is now their greatest vulnerability. Centuries of exposure to wind, rain, and even the salt-laden air have left the surface pitted and fragile, with some symbols barely clinging to existence. Conservationists face a delicate balancing act: how to stabilize the wall without erasing the very marks they're trying to save. The techniques they've developed read like a blend of cutting-edge science and ancient craftsmanship. Microscopic consolidants, painstakingly applied with syringe-like tools, seep into the stone's pores to reinforce its structure without altering its appearance. These synthetic resins mimic the natural minerals that once held the rock together, creating an invisible scaffold against erosion. But chemistry alone isn't enough. To combat moisture, the silent killer of porous limestone engineers designed a discreet drainage system behind the wall, channeling groundwater away before it can freeze and expand inside cracks. Even the prison's original architecture has been weaponized for preservation. Archaeologists discovered that certain medieval mortar mixtures contained volcanic ash, making them more resistant to weathering. Modern conservators now replicate this recipe for repairs, blending tradition with innovation. The battle against time extends beyond natural decay. With the calendar's rising fame comes the threat of vandalism, not out of malice, but from well-meaning visitors who can't resist touching the grooves. To prevent wear, a nearly invisible nanocoating was developed, thinner than a human hair yet tough enough to shield the surface from oils and friction. Meanwhile, motion-activated climate controls maintain perfect humidity levels, responding to crowd density in real time. These measures might seem extreme, but consider what's at stake. Every fingerprint left on that wall isn't just a smudge, it's potential data loss, a faint symbol that might hold the key to understanding an entire culture's relationship with time. Documentation has become its own form of preservation. High-resolution 3D scans capture the wall down to micrometer precision, creating digital backups that allow researchers to study the carvings without risking physical contact. But technology doesn't stop there. Artificial intelligence now monitors the wall's condition 24 hours a day, using hyperspectral imaging to detect early signs of deterioration invisible to human eyes. The system can alert conservators to microscopic cracks before they threaten a single symbol, ensuring interventions happen at the molecular level. Perhaps the most unexpected preservation tool has been the local community itself. Formerly seen as a burden, the prison's remote location now works in its favor. A team of trained villagers, descendants of the very people who might have once guarded these exiles, serve as custodians, blending traditional stonemasonry skills with modern conservation training. Their intimate knowledge of the region's weather patterns and geology helps predict risks long before instruments can measure them. In a poetic twist, the calendar that once gave prisoners agency over time now empowers their one-time jailers' descendants to protect their legacy. These efforts aren't just about freezing the calendar in time. Conservators deliberately leave some natural wear visible, allowing subtle erosion to continue under controlled conditions. Why? Because the patina of age itself tells a story. The way certain symbols are more weathered reveals which were most frequently touched, offering clues about their importance. The goal isn't to create a sterile museum piece, but to preserve the wall as a living artifact, one that still breathes with the echoes of those who carved it. Every flake of stone saved is another word in a letter from the past, one we're only beginning to read. The prison calendar's journey from a forgotten cell to global fascination is a testament to how deeply its story resonates. Almost overnight, the discovery became more than an archaeological footnote. It ignited a firestorm of public curiosity, featured in prime-time documentaries that framed it as a real-life mystery wrapped in history's enigma. One film crew even recreated the cell down to the last detail, using CGI to show how sunlight would have danced across the carvings during solstices, turning academic research into cinematic spectacle. Publishers scrambled to release books unpacking its symbolism, while museums jostled to include fragments of the wall in high-profile exhibitions on human resilience. Suddenly, an artifact born from isolation found itself at the center of a cultural moment, its grooves dissected in TED Talks and Reddit threads alike. What makes this calendar so magnetizing isn't just its age or craftsmanship, it's the raw humanity behind it. Media narratives latched onto the juxtaposition of oppression and ingenuity, framing the Exiles as underdog geniuses who outsmarted their captors with astronomy and grit. A best-selling graphic novel reimagined them as a ragtag band of scholars and rebels, their clandestine timekeeping a covert act of rebellion. Even fashion designers borrowed motifs from the carvings, printing spirals and lunar phases on runway garments as symbols of endurance. The calendar's appeal lies in its duality, a scientific marvel etched in desperation, a work of art born from survival. But the media's spotlight does more than entertain, it fuels real-world impact. Public interest translated into crowd-funded research grants, allowing archaeologists to extend digs at related exile sites. A viral social media campaign pressured governments to fast-track the calendar's preservation, with influencers staging carve-ins where followers etched replica symbols to raise awareness. Museums reported record attendance for exhibits featuring the wall, proving that history, when framed as human drama, can outsell blockbuster movies. The calendar's fame also sparked debates about whose stories get preserved. If these exiles could captivate millions, what other marginalized voices might be waiting in archaeology's shadows? Critics argue the hype risks oversimplifying the calendar's complexity. Some documentaries lean too heavily on mystery tropes, reducing nuanced scholarship to clickbait cliffhangers. Others fret that romanticizing the exile's struggle might erase the brutality of their reality. No amount of celestial tracking could undo their suffering. Yet even these tensions serve a purpose. They keep the conversation alive, ensuring the calendar isn't just admired but questioned, a living artifact rather than a static relic. The most unexpected outcome, how the exile's legacy now inspires modern movements. Prison reform advocates cite the calendar as evidence of creativity under constraint, using it to argue for educational programs in correctional facilities. Astronomers collaborate with incarcerated individuals today, teaching them to map stars as the ancient prisoners once did. In this light, the wall's markings aren't just a message from the past, they're a blueprint for empathy, proving that even society's outcasts can reshape how we see time, history, and our shared humanity. The exiles who carved their calendar into that prison wall left behind more than just markings. They left a masterclass in resilience. Stripped of everything, they turned scarcity into innovation, using broken pottery and bone fragments to etch their defiance into stone. But their true genius wasn't just in the tools they improvised, it was in their refusal to let their minds atrophy. Where the empire saw empty time, they saw structure. Where others might have succumbed to despair, they created meaning. Their calendar wasn't just a way to track days, it was a rebellion against the dehumanizing void of captivity. Creativity flourishes in the most unexpected places, and this prison wall stands as one of history's great testaments to that truth. These prisoners had no parchment, no instruments, no freedom. Yet they engineered a system of timekeeping so precise, it rivaled the work of royal astronomers. They transformed cracks in the ceiling into celestial markers, using the architecture of their oppression as a canvas for observation. Their story shatters the myth that innovation requires privilege. Sometimes it's the very absence of resources that sparks the most astonishing ingenuity. At its core, this calendar reveals something fundamental about being human. We are wired to make sense of time. For those exiles, tracking the moon's phases or the sun's solstices wasn't just practical, it was psychological survival. Modern studies of isolated populations, from polar explorers to astronauts, show that losing track of time leads to rapid cognitive decline. The prisoners understood this instinctively. By dividing eternity into measurable units, they preserved their sanity and identity. Their carvings whisper across centuries that to mark time is to assert, "I am still here." Beyond resilience and ingenuity, the calendar speaks to the indomitable power of memory. These exiles weren't just counting days, they were preserving knowledge under siege. Imagine the risk of whispering astronomical formulas between cells, or teaching a fellow prisoner to recognize Venus's phases from a sliver of window. In doing so, they became curators of their own cultures, safeguarding traditions their captors sought to erase. Their wall became a living archive, proof that memory can outlast empires. Perhaps the most poignant lesson lies in the calendar's imperfections. Some symbols are uneven, corrected mid-carving. Others show wear from being touched repeatedly, like talismans. These flaws remind us that resilience isn't about perfection, it's about persistence. The prisoners didn't need flawless records. They needed to keep trying, keep observing, keep adding their voices to the stone. Their legacy challenges us to reconsider what it means to leave a mark. Today, we drown in digital footprints, our lives meticulously documented. But the exiles remind us that true endurance isn't about volume, it's about depth. A single groove carved with enough purpose can echo louder than 1,000 forgotten tweets. Their calendar wasn't just a record, it was a beacon cast across the ages to remind us that even in darkness, the human spirit insists on being seen. The wall's greatest gift isn't its astronomical precision or its historical revelations, it's the quiet reassurance that no isolation is absolute. These prisoners, abandoned by the world, still found ways to connect, to the stars above, to the strangers who would one day stand in their cell, and to the immutable truth that to measure time is to defy oblivion. Their marks aren't just on stone, they're on the fabric of what it means to be human. The prison calendar's influence on later timekeeping systems might not be a straight line etched in stone, but its echoes ripple through history in unexpected ways. While no archaeologist has found a direct chain linking these carvings to the Gregorian or Islamic calendars, the principles they embody: lunar cycles, solstice markers, the blending of celestial observation with daily survival, are universal threads in humanity's relationship with time. What makes this ancient system remarkable isn't just its sophistication, but how it mirrors independent innovations across continents and eras, suggesting a shared human instinct to wrest order from chaos. Take the lunar tracking etched into that prison wall. Its groupings of 29 and 30 grooves align almost exactly with the moon's phases, a pattern seen in everything from the Babylonian lunar calendars to the traditional timekeeping of Pacific Islanders. The exiles didn't need outside influence to develop this. Their isolation forced them to rediscover what others observed under open skies. This parallel evolution hints at something profound, that the drive to measure time isn't just cultural, it's biological, wired into us as deeply as the need for storytelling or song. The solar alignments are even more telling. When modern researchers mapped the wall's solstice markers against later Roman and Chinese calendars, they found near-identical approaches to dividing the year by sunlight angles. The prisoner's method, using a slit of light creeping across specific carvings, was cruder than the obelisks and sundials of great cities, but the underlying concept was the same. It's as if these exiles, stripped of resources, distilled timekeeping down to its purest form, arriving at solutions that elite scholars would later codify with fancier tools. Where the prison calendar truly diverges is in its purpose. State-sponsored systems like the Julian calendar were instruments of power, designed to tax crops or schedule wars. The exiles' version served the opposite end, resistance. Their lunar notations might have helped plan covert gatherings during moonless nights, while solstice marks could have signaled moments when guard patrols shifted. This subversive practicality finds eerie parallels in the agricultural almanacs of enslaved communities, where celestial knowledge doubled as coded maps to freedom. Timekeeping in these hands wasn't just measurement, it was liberation. The most tantalizing connections lie in the margins. Among the prison's symbols are a handful that resemble medieval monastic calendars, where monks tracked feast days in cramped script. Both systems emerged from isolation, both turned timekeeping into spiritual discipline. Even the exiles' corrections grooves, abandoned and recarved, find kinship in the annotations of Renaissance astronomers, who constantly revised their models as new observations shattered old certainties. Precision wasn't the goal, persistence was. Perhaps the calendar's real legacy isn't in influencing specific systems, but in proving how universally human it is to seek patterns in time. From Incan quippus to Viking rune stones, cultures with no possible contact arrived at similar ways to slice eternity into manageable pieces. The prisoner's wall stands as a testament to this irrepressible urge, not because it taught the world how to count days, but because it reminds us that even in the darkest corners, we'll always reach for the stars to tell us who we are. For all we've uncovered about the prison calendar, its shadows stretch far beyond what the light of research has reached. Take the identities of its creators. Were they a tight-knit circle of scholars passing knowledge between cells, or a scattered network of individuals adding marks whenever inspiration struck? The wall symbols show both startling consistency and abrupt shifts in style, as if multiple hands contributed across generations. Some grooves bear the confident strokes of trained astronomers, while others wobble with the uncertainty of novices learning as they carved. This unevenness isn't a flaw, it's a clue. It suggests a living system, adapting as new prisoners arrived with fragments of knowledge from distant homelands, each leaving their own imprint on this communal project. Accuracy remains another tantalizing unknown. Modern astronomers have verified that some eclipse predictions carved into the stone align perfectly with celestial records from the same era. Yet other markings deviate slightly, not enough to dismiss as errors, but enough to hint at alternative calculations. Were these discrepancies caused by the prisoner's limited view of the sky, or did they represent regional variations in timekeeping traditions? One particularly puzzling set of symbols corresponds to no known astronomical event, sparking debates about whether it records a lost comet, a local weather phenomenon, or something more personal, a prisoner's birthday perhaps, or the anniversary of their exile. The biggest unanswered question might lie beyond this single cell. If one group of prisoners developed such an intricate system, how many other exile sites might have hidden similar calendars beneath layers of dirt and neglect? Archaeologists have found suggestive markings in a handful of other ancient prisons, a series of notches in a Sardinian mine, strange geometric patterns in a Thracian fortress, but none as comprehensive as our featured wall. The scarcity could mean this calendar was extraordinary for its time, or it might reflect how rarely such sites are examined through the lens of timekeeping. Most ancient prisons were studied as monuments to punishment, not potential repositories of scientific resilience. Perhaps most haunting are the gaps in the calendar itself, stretches where markings grow sparse or stop entirely. Were these periods of despair when no one had the heart to track time, or evidence of mass executions or transfers that abruptly silenced the carvers? The wall holds these secrets close, offering just enough to remind us how much we'll never know. Yet these unanswered questions aren't failures of research, they're invitations. Every mystery surrounding the calendar ensures it remains a living artifact, not a closed case in some museum archive. The imperfections in its predictions challenge our assumptions about ancient science. The variations in its symbols whisper of cultural exchanges we've yet to trace, and the possibility of undiscovered counterparts keeps archaeologists scanning prison walls worldwide, knowing that somewhere beneath centuries of grime, another exiled mind might have left its own defiant mark on eternity. The calendar's greatest gift may be its refusal to surrender all its secrets, ensuring we keep looking, keep questioning, just as its creators did under far darker skies. The story of this prison calendar is far from finished. In fact, the most exciting chapters may still lie ahead. Cutting-edge technologies are peeling back layers of history we once thought were lost forever. Imagine hyperspectral imaging scanners, so sensitive they can detect traces of pigments invisible to the naked eye, revealing which symbols were highlighted during rituals or celestial events. Or consider AI-powered pattern recognition systems sifting through thousands of ancient inscriptions worldwide, searching for matches to the calendar's enigmatic symbols. These tools aren't just adding details, they're rewriting our understanding of how knowledge survived in the darkest corners of history. Upcoming excavations at nearby exile sites could revolutionize the narrative. Recently discovered ruins less than a mile from the original prison show tantalizing clues, fragments of pottery etched with similar lunar notations, and a collapsed watchtower whose foundation stones bear grooves resembling the calendar's solstice markers. Archaeologists suspect these sites formed a network, with prisoners transferred between locations, carrying their timekeeping traditions like hidden seeds. Ground-penetrating radar has already identified subterranean chambers that might contain personal artifacts, a carved bone stylus, a smuggled star chart that could connect individual names to the wall's anonymous markings. But the real breakthroughs may come from unexpected disciplines. Geneticists are now analyzing sediment samples from between the stones, hoping to extract ancient DNA that could trace prisoners' geographic origins. Linguists are applying machine learning to decode potential writing systems within the symbols, treating them not just as notations but as a lost language of survival. Even astrophysicists have joined the hunt, using supercomputers to model historical night skies, cross-referencing the calendar's eclipse predictions with solar activity records to pinpoint exact years of creation. The most profound revelations might emerge from studying the calendar not as an isolated artifact, but as part of a global phenomenon. From Siberian labor camps to Napoleonic-era prisons, incarcerated communities worldwide developed similar methods to mark time, a universal grammar of resistance waiting to be deciphered. By comparing these systems, researchers are uncovering fundamental truths about how humans preserve identity under oppression. Every new technology peels back another layer, but the wall still guards its deepest secrets. Why do certain symbols cluster near the ceiling while others crowd the floor? Was there a hierarchy to their placement? And what of the faint, half-finished carvings in the cell's darkest corner, abandoned plans, or messages left deliberately incomplete? The answers won't just illuminate this calendar, they'll help us hear the whispers of all those who ever counted days in shadows, waiting for the light to find them. The ancient calendar carved into that prison wall isn't just a relic, it's a mirror. Every groove, every symbol reflects something timeless about what it means to be human. These exiles, stripped of everything, chose not just to endure, but to observe, to calculate, to leave behind a record that would outlast empires. Their story isn't just about survival, it's about the audacity to claim a place in the universe, even from the depths of a cell. Think about what it took to create this. No textbooks, no instruments, no guarantee anyone would ever see their work. Just hands tracing the stars from memory, turning stone into a ledger of hope. That's why this calendar resonates so deeply today. It's not just an artifact, it's proof that curiosity and resilience can flourish in the harshest soil. Whether tracking eclipses or marking solstices, these prisoners were doing more than measuring days. They were asserting their humanity in a system designed to erase it. And now, centuries later, their legacy lives on. Every time a researcher deciphers another symbol, every time a visitor runs their fingers over those grooves, the exiles' voices grow louder. Their wall has become a bridge between past and present, reminding us that even in darkness, people find ways to shine. But the calendar's story isn't finished. With each new technology, AI, advanced imaging, genetic analysis, we uncover another layer of its secrets. Who were these carvers really? What other fragments of their knowledge are waiting to be found? The answers could rewrite chapters of history, revealing how much wisdom was forged not in palaces but in prisons. That's the power of this discovery. It challenges us to look beyond the grand narratives of kings and conquests, to listen for the whispers of those written out of history, because sometimes the most profound truths aren't etched in gold, they are scratched into stone by hands that refuse to be forgotten. So what do you think? Could there be other hidden calendars like this, waiting in ruins across the world? Share your theories in the comments, and let's keep the conversation going. And if you want to dive deeper into history's unsolved mysteries, hit that subscribe button. We've got plenty more stories where this one came from. After all, the past is full of voices just waiting to be heard. All we have to do is